All right, it's Chris Michaels' show. A little bit of a technical difficulty. Boy, Chris Michaels is in quite the insufferable funk. Every once in a while, we get into these existential moments where Chris Michaels just views humanity with scorn simply because they cannot use Google or, in fact, read emails in context. And in this case, the next diatribe that's coming out of the Epstein emails is that there's a phrase in there called a lull, Lull, right? And in the email chain, they're speaking about how they are going to rebuild certain sections of either Little St. James or Great St. James, Jeffrey Epstein's islands. And they're requesting a lull. And then they say, these people in the email chain, they're saying, well, see if you can find a 2 or 3 year old lull. And immediately the social media angle starts up with, oh, yes, this is it. We finally found the code word for children because they say 2 to 3 years old. Lull must be code for child, for toddler. Yes, that's exactly what. No, wrong. Wrong. You're making people that run around like this, they're making people like me look bad. And unfortunately, that's really all I give a damn about because I'm out there on the fringes. I mean, we have Atlantis Thursdays. We talk about all kinds of esoteric knowledge, not as much as we should, but we still do it, right? So if you merely do a Google search, look for a lull, it is a forklift. They're looking for a forklift that is around 2 to 3 years old. And that's the real problem. Pardon me for a moment. Hey, stupid, cut it out. The 4-footed furry program producer is being disobedient. And I've brought this up many times. Anyway, the problem with him is that he's got a chronic yeast and bacteria infection, and he just can't get over it. And nobody is actually doing anything positive about it because it is chronic. Anyway, going back to lull. It is a forklift. And if you read the email chain, you will realize that they're literally talking about trying to find forklifts. And they even give it price estimates. So I don't want to hear anybody saying, oh, lull means child. No, it doesn't. If you read the emails, they're literally looking for construction equipment. This is why you cannot believe every single person that posts anything on the Epstein files without them posting the full link so that you can read the full context of the emails. Because remember, people were trying to say that, oh, white tuna, that's another code word. But if you read the context of the emails, a lot of Jeffrey Epstein's assistants were talking about food. And they're literally passing recipes back and forth between one another. And then the next thing was ice cream. Jeffrey Epstein is obsessed with Oreo ice cream. So, and they're all asking for ice cream. This is clearly more code word for child. Okay, this is it. We found the silver bullet. Wrong. If you read the emails, they're literally talking about ice cream. And they even pass ice cream restaurants. And, well, I don't know if an ice cream restaurant could be a thing, but ice cream shops, that's a better phrase. They're literally passing back and forth ice cream shop addresses between one another and Yelp reviews and everything else. Most of these exchanges are taking place between Jeffrey Epstein's assistants. So they're not going to be referencing children. However, I will say this. I can equally buy ice cream being code word for something, but it is not human trafficking. Ice cream is also slang for methamphetamines. And I can completely believe that these people are using all kinds of drugs. If Jeffrey Epstein is doing anything besides what I agree with people on what's really going on. I'm just saying that the social media people are not doing it any justice because they're so honed in on the fact of trying to find some kind of code word like pizza or walnut sauce that they are looking like a bunch of asses. Ice cream is slang for methamphetamines, and I can believe that these hyper elites are trying to get methamphetamines. And if you don't want to buy that, might I steer your attention in the direction of Joseph Biden? Because there's no way Joseph Biden could have done what he did for 4 years without being hawked up on something. Then again, if you read the Jeffrey Epstein emails, there's an exchange in there that clearly says that Joseph Biden was shot in 2019, and whoever you saw on TV or signing any kinds of documents, albeit with a robo signature, right, with a robo pen, was an actor with a mask on. I can equally buy that too. But regardless, anyway, my advice to you, definitely look at all of these Epstein revelations with a jaundiced eye and do your own research. And it could be as quick as a Google search. That's all I'm saying to you, because a lot of these people are merely trying to get visibility and trying to re-up the clickbait nonsense on social media. That's all it is. Okay, so let's turn to Iran. Let's turn to Israel, because what's going on over there? They're now in discussions, right? They're in discussions. They're trying to find some kind of middle ground where Iran is going to acquiesce to all of Israel's demands. And Israel, as usual, is making outrageous demands from Iran. What are they doing? Well, it is no longer okay to stop a uranium enrichment program. And this is according to avia.pro, avia.pro. It is no longer acceptable to stop that program. They now want that program eliminated. No uranium enrichment, doesn't matter if it's for peaceful purposes or otherwise. Done. And they want verifiable evidence that the enrichment infrastructure has not only been removed, but destroyed. Now, this could be good or bad. The Iranians already agreed to the IAEA coming in to inspect all of these supposed nuclear sites. Now, the Iranians also remember that the IAEA was giving coordinates to the Mossad and the United States because they were compromised. The nuclear facility inspectors, they were compromised. And lo and behold, Iranian infrastructure was hit with missiles. Right? So we already know that there's no reason for Iran to accept any kind of inspectors. However, here we are today saying, sure, they'll go around and do it. Furthermore, this means that any kind of nuclear uranium stockpiles or infrastructure cannot even be used for civilian purposes. And Iran is, for some reason, acquiescing to this kind of thing. The next stipulation, according to Netanyahu and the Trump administration, beholden to the aforementioned, is that they want the Iranians to limit ballistic missiles to 300 kilometers, which means Israel will be out of range of any Iranian technology. Does anybody understand how outrageously idiotic Netanyahu is to even try to demand this kind of thing? It's outrageous. Outrageous. All the while, Israel is allowed to have all kinds of wonderful American technology, stealth planes, missiles, nuclear technology. And that's according to Colin Powell, not according to Chris Michaels. I'm not rumor mongering here. I'm citing a U.S. official, despite the fact that he's deceased. There is no reason for the Iranians to give up their ballistic missile system. They don't need nuclear weapons. They don't need this kind of uranium stockpile because they've got so many missiles that it will give everybody in the region a very hard time to push back against. And all of these negotiations between Israel, the United States, and Iran, they're merely taking place to buy Israel and the United States time to reinforce defensive measures for the Iranian response after an attack. That's all this is for. They have no impetus to actually create any kind of lasting peace in the region. None. And they never intended on doing so. This is a stereotypical Western, you thought I was going to say something else, Western approach to warmongering. They do this kind of thing in the Ukraine. They do this kind of thing in the Middle East. They're going to do it with China and Taiwan. Taiwan. All this is that they're trying to say, well, we're negotiating at the moment. Remember what happened last year with the Trump administration. Remember what happened 2 days ago with the Ukrainians. Every time there is supposed to be some kind of summit where people are coming together in some locale to negotiate some kind of peace, whether it's with the Iranians or the Ukrainians, the West, including Israel, the United States, Europe, NATO, all of them, within days before this peace summit, they unleash some kind of attack. This is not a faithful negotiating partnership that the West has with the rest of the world. This is duplicitous. This is disgusting. If you want world peace, you have to abide by some kind of rule. And the Russians have finally read the tea leaves. They basically have told the United States that ever since we had this meeting in Alaska, nothing has gone right. You gave us some kind of verbal assurances that this kind of avenue will not be approached, but here we are in 2026, and guess what? The Ukrainians are doing whatever it is that they want to do. So if you are serious about trying to create some kind of peace, then we want it in writing. And the Trump administration has not been very forthcoming with generating such documents. Once again, you have to look at this in a way that anytime the Trump administration is saying, oh, we're engaging in peace talks, it is nothing more than giving the Trump-aligned side more time to rearm, re-equip, and redeploy, because they do not have peace on the agenda. Now, the only saving grace with all of this is that Donald Trump and his administration tend to follow along astrological signs and astrological events. And I don't mean, oh, it's the Big Dipper. No, I mean talking about new moons and eclipses. The Trump administration, at least Donald Trump, I suspect, is very, very sensitive to these kinds of events. So what did we have today on February 17th? We had not only an eclipse, which most of us didn't see. I think it was in Antarctica. You could see it. We had an eclipse, and then we also have a new moon. So during these kinds of events, you're not really supposed to do anything. These are not about manifesting something. This is about reflecting on something. Particularly, eclipses in the Talmud are signs of negativity. And it is a sign to reflect upon one's actions and then say, okay, I was a real dirtbag in this situation. I need to repent in some kind of way. I need to donate. I need to do something with my family. I need to apologize, whatever it is, right? And then a new moon represents rebirth, oddly enough, right? The moon goes as dark as possible. And then once the new moon is complete, you start to see that little fingernail crescent of light. And so it's rebirth. It's also a sign of menstrual cycles. So there is a feminine element to all of this. The reason why I bring these two astrological and astronomical events up is because Trump goes along these lines. Every time he tries to initiate some kind of policy, some kind of attack, there is some kind of astrological event that is right there with him. So, given those two pieces of information, I do not think that the Trump administration is going to go on the attack anytime soon, despite the fact of what you think and what you see in the Gulf. I think they are holding off on a lot of what is going on. And Forbes, and this is another reason why, there's actually a multitude of reasons, not just astrological. Nobody wants to admit, at least in the mainstream media, that the Iranians are far more advanced than anyone wants to admit, right? Not to sound redundant, because they've got hypersonic missiles. And not only do they have regular missiles, the run-of-the-mill missiles, but they've got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of missiles. Now, the problems for the Iranians is that there are some unaccounted for Starlink terminals. I thought they had captured everything. It turns out they've only captured about 20% of these Starlink terminals. Now, that means there's around what? 2 times 8 is 100. There's about 650 Starlink terminals in the hands of Mossad, CIA, MI6, and agent provocateurs within Iran, despite the fact that Iran has turned off its internet. So there's a lot of danger involved with all of this. Russia. Zelensky, coke-snorting loser and C-list comedian. He is saying that, well, we need 3 months of complete ceasefire in order for us to hold an election. 3 months, 90 days. Putin has said, well, we'll give you a single day. If you want to hold elections, because you should be able to count all of the votes in a single day, we'll give you 1 day's ceasefire. Everyone goes to the polls, and everyone gets the results later that night. Not unreasonable. In fact, it's not even unreasonable to expect that kind of voting timeline and deadline in peacetime, like in the United States. So I'm not quite sure why the United States goes on counting ballots for days, months, weeks at a time. Anyway, Russia, according to Forbes, possesses catastrophic weapons, and the U.S. would be better off preventing their use. This is something that people do not pay attention to. And this is a reporter, or it's actually en.topcore, topcor.ru. This is the article that is citing the Forbes article. Talk about 2 degrees of separation. Now is the time for the U.S. military to ensure that Russia does not launch a nuclear-tipped anti-satellite missile. And the United States must improve their defenses and use all available diplomatic means to de-escalate the standoff between Russia and the U.S. Now, this is written by Professor John Klein, who is the author of the Forbes magazine article. Why are they saying this? It's because the Russians were using Starlink to go after the Ukrainians. Well, Elon Musk said, well, this isn't fair. So he turned off, or at least stopped, the Russians from being able to access Starlink satellites to attack the Ukrainians. Well, that's not fair, right? Why is Starlink working for the Ukrainians but not the Russians? So it seems as though that someone somewhere on the Russian side said, guess what? If you don't stop this nonsense, then we're going to do the unthinkable. We're going to start destroying satellites. This isn't something that should surprise anybody. I mean, Russia has been pushed and pushed and pushed to the nth degree, and nobody expects any kind of response. Those days are over. Not only are they over on the international stage, but they're also over in the domestic stage in the United States. Because after the Epstein Files have been released and plenty of people have been going through them, despite the fact of what I brought up earlier and how people are taking a lot out of context. I want you to think about this. The DOJ released about 300 gigabytes worth of files. Do you know how many files from Epstein that they're holding on to? They're holding on to 14.6 terabytes. So what does this equate to proportionally? They've released about 2% of the Epstein files that supposedly didn't exist until 3 weeks ago, according to Trump and Pam Bondi, who also has a connection to Palm Beach, Florida, and the original Epstein case back in 2008 and 9. So I don't want to hear about, oh, yes, we've released everything. There's no further evidence. There are no ongoing investigations. And we are through talking about Epstein. And we're going to take Donald Trump's advice, where he said that the FBI and the DOJ should just tell everyone that's asking about Epstein and his ring that I've got better things to do than focus on Epstein. Not when you've only released 2% of the data. Sorry, that's not the case. We need to know what exactly these ghouls were talking about. What were they doing? We already know that a lot of these email exchanges are completely supremacists. These people in these hyper elite circles, they detest human beings like you and me. They hate us. They think of us as bottom dwellers, that we're not good enough because we don't have a few $1,000,000 in cash to throw around. We're not smart enough to get the game. Zero Hedge responded to a very odd email exchange from the Epstein Files. And it's where Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew are talking about cloning. Yes, cloning. Of all things. Oh, I thought that was sci-fi. Wrong. It's probably being done. It's probably been perfected. But I'll read to you this. This is from Jeffrey Epstein. Right, Katie Couric. Now, Katie Couric, she's America's darling. She was on, what was it, Good Morning America, I think, or the Today Show. It was the Today Show with Matt Lauer, an equally reprehensible shrew. Katie Couric was here, and we were talking about, I think we should, Mr. Epstein says, I want to start cloning things. Me. Mr. Epstein wants to start creating clones of himself. And with certain people, Prince Andrew got upset because he was all, quote unquote, if I had a conscience, could you kill it for spare parts? Or if it had a consciousness. And I said, I'll make it without a head. Would that make you feel any better? And Katie Couric, I thought, was going to start to vomit. So Katie Couric is in these circles with Jeffrey Epstein, with Prince Andrew, sexual deviants. So is it unreasonable to assume that Miss Couric was not too far off the mark, where Miss Couric was also engaging in some kind of sexual deviancy with these utter degenerates in Jeffrey Epstein's hyper-elite circles? Don't know. Not saying yes. I'm not saying no. I'm just postulating the question because it's a valid question if she's seen having dinner parties with princes. Then there is this exchange between Mr. Epstein and one Martin Nowak. Now, who is Martin Nowak? Well, I will tell you in a second because he is an Austrian scientist. So we all know that we should trust Austrians, right? I don't think so. Anyway, Jeffrey, I am back from Rome. I met with Savant Pabo from Leipzig. He sequences old bones and got a complete Neanderthal genome. You would like him. He knows Church, which is another individual. The two of them could build, now this is the fun part, a Neanderthal person. Why are you trying to create humanoids that have been left to history? This reminds me of what? It reminds me of Edgar Casey, where he cites Atlantis. I brought this up. If you're a watcher, you know you're not on Spotify. I do a weekly Atlantis show because I can't stand politics every single day. But this reminds me of not only Edgar Casey, but also Zulu history. In both of those pieces of mythology, they talk about how there are fleshy golems. They talk about how there are, according to Edgar Casey, he calls them things, where they are created to do the yeoman's work. They are there to create like artisan stuff, like you know, working around with steel, smithing, working in the fields, so on. In Zulu mythology, the same kind of beings, they're not called things, but they are fleshy golems, and they're part beast, part human with no soul. But eventually, they do get a soul. They are doing so much human work that it goes so far to say that humans became so lazy after the advent of these things that humans forgot how to chew. And it was up to these fleshy golems to chew the food of the Zulus so that they could swallow the food. That's how rife with sloth Zulu history has said mankind became. It appears as though that Mr. Epstein is trying to create the same kind of being. Because once again, if you go through all of these kinds of emails that have gone back and forth, they are hyper obsessed with genealogy. They're hyper obsessed with where your bloodline comes from. They even talk about forcing people to take 23andMe tests if they want to go to certain types of country clubs. I mean, I thought this kind of master race BS stopped back in 1945, but here we are in the 2000s, and we're still being subjected to this kind of nonsense. And unfortunately for everybody, it doesn't appear as though anything is going to change. We're still being forced to endure these kinds of people. They're still in positions of power with politics, with finance. They're still part of the royal family. These people are still ruling over us. These Epstein file releases say to me that what they intended to do was to shove it in our faces. That, yes, your suspicions are correct. We're going to release documents that take you right up to the line, but don't reveal anything concrete. There will be no smoking gun for you to go on. And because these individuals are so powerful, we at the DOJ and the FBI, we're going to cover it up. We're never going to release the other 98% of the documents. Because if we did, society as a whole would likely collapse. Because the individuals that are involved in this kind of debauchery are supposed to be the titans of industry that we've in the media, given all kinds of interviews for, flowering and blooming interviews of how wonderful they are and how great of business entrepreneurs these people are. They brought themselves up by the bootstrap. No, it all seems as though they're part of a network. And this network supports them, especially if what they intend to do is something that takes away from mankind, either physically, emotionally, spiritually, or legally. They'll never do it. This was meant to shove it in our faces. Yes, we did these things. Yes, we'll take you right up to the line. No, you will not have any smoking gun evidence. And yes, we will still continue to rule over you. And furthermore, we're going to get away with it. And our children and benefactors, after we die, will continue our legacy. And you will be forced to endure. That's what this is all about. That's why the Epstein Files were released the way they were, with no type of any collation. It was just a bunch of documents spewed out all over the place. Yes, there's a search engine, but there are thousands of results and duplicate emails. 10, 20, 30 email chains are all duplicates in these documents and in this database. Do you think the regular American voter would go through something like that? I've tried to do it, but do you think normal people would try to do it? No, the answer is no. So it is an overwhelming prospect. They shut it out. They say it's just too big for me. It's too big to believe. There's no possible way something like this could have ever happened. But in reality, it did. So that's going to be what we have to fight back against over the next couple of years, at least throughout the rest of Trump's administration. We need more visibility. But remember also, Trump has promised transparency. He has not promised accountability. That's going to be the Chris Michaels Show. I'll be back as always. A couple of interviews coming up this week and next week. Do not forget to tune in at the beginning of March, where we have Dr. Joseph Farrell coming back. He's always a fantastic guest. And I do wish that everyone finds, likes, and shares me, because I'm a brilliant, lovable fuzzball. And if you're paying attention to someone like myself, you are too. It's the Chris Michaels Show, and I am Chris Michaels.